great day for work here at the Happy Healthy Workplace podcast. I'm Kimberly Ficklin, your host. And every week we talk to professionals just like you all around the world because we want to find out what they do to create a profitable business, the kind of business where people really want to work. Hello and welcome everyone. Today we're talking to Michelle Dickinson again. Michelle is the author of the book, Breaking Into My Life. You may remember her from episode 15, where she shared with us how to drive real change in your company culture so that people with invisible disabilities can be themselves. She's a passionate mental health advocate, a TED speaker, and a published author of a memoir entitled Breaking Into My Life. After years of playing the role of child caregiver, Michelle embarked on her own healing journey of self-discovery. Her memoir offers a rare glimpse into a young girl's experience living with and loving her bipolar mother. First, welcome back again.
Thanks for having me, Kimberly.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so happy that you've come back to share more with us. So today, Michelle's going to go a bit deeper into bringing awareness to all programs that are available to organizations for mental health culture. And she has some great information that she's going to share with us today. So, Michelle, I'm just going to turn it over to you. You had sent me an email and said you had some great data to share with us. So why don't you just get started with sharing some of that great stuff?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This is such a very important topic. It's so near and dear to my heart because of my lived experience and then my corporate experience that I just wanted to take a second to share. Obviously, it's important that we all pay attention and we cultivate a mental health inclusive culture where we work, because invisible disabilities are really like the last piece of the diversity inclusion puzzle. If you ask me, folks with invisible disabilities should be, accepted and given whatever they need to perform to the best of their ability in the workplace. But beyond it being just good business and the right thing to do, the reality is we spend so many hours in the workplace every week of our life. And if we have a mental illness, it's really hard to conceal it, especially when we come to work. But that's the reality for most people, is if they have a mental illness, they have to conceal it and not bring their full selves to work. It's embarrassing. People might think that they're looked upon as weak or maybe incapable. And so there's embarrassment, like I mentioned. And then that game face, we have to feel like we put on that game face, right? Which is so difficult. So the lack of compassion in the workplace really actually makes mental illness harder for people to deal with, especially at work. The reality around the data, Kimberly, is that mental disorders are the single most expensive category of health costs for many employers across the industries. It's estimated that it's $17 billion is what's lost annually in productivity in the US because of unaddressed mental health concerns.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is a tremendous amount of money.
It is. And mental health is more common than cancer, heart disease, and diabetes combined. Yet because of the stigma, it's the organ that we do not talk about because it has such a big stigma around it and we're embarrassed about it.
People are probably afraid to talk to other people, not just the person who maybe is struggling with a disability, but the people who want to talk to them about their disability and probably don't even know how to have those types of conversations.
Right. And as you know, 1 in 5 Americans suffer. They suffer annually from a mental health condition like anxiety or depression, but 8 of 10 employees do not seek out treatment because of that fear and shame. They just don't. I mean, they struggle with it. They think they have to shoulder it themselves, navigate it on their own. And that definitely costs themselves their well-being, their joy, but also their performance and impacts their company.
Oh, absolutely. Because they can't truly be transparent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And without that, well, we know how important transparency is in business for everyone included. Yeah. And so if you can't be that person, you can't self-disclose because you're worried about what people will think about you. Interesting concept. Thinking about how isolating that is for a person in the workplace.
Exactly. And so for mental health, so let's take, for example, depression. Depressed employees miss between 6 and 25 more days per year and suffer performance issues between 13% and 29% of their time worked. So you might have a people leader who is looking at an employee for poor performance when really what is going on is a mental health challenge.
Yeah, we talked about that on the last episode as well. Yeah, and mental health can also have to do with even if they have some type of a chronic illness, and that can go into mental health as well.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't realize that when people get sick, they also mental health issues tend to rise around that.
Yeah. So, I'm grateful for the opportunity to share some of that with you, but then I want to kind of bring some light to this and provide some hope. So recently, I had 2 years at a Fortune 500 company where I helped build an ERG, an employee resource group for the employees of the company to voluntarily get engaged and create a stigma-free culture for themselves and their peers. They knew firsthand, rather, what mental health felt like and wanted to create that space for their peers and themselves to really be able to bring themselves to work. So I had that experience for 2 years working, creating, and elevating that conversation. It became the largest employee resource group in the company and the one that grew the quickest. Just to kind of give you a reality around build it and they will come, these employees were eagerly engaged to create more conversations, more open conversations so that we had more compassion in the workplace. So I learned a tremendous amount from what we tried, what worked and what didn't work. And the thing I left you with on the last podcast was around mental health first aid training, because, I don't want to diminish companies who are really getting the impact of mental health on their employees, especially stress, anxiety, and then you look at the disability cost impacting the bottom line. I don't want to diminish that some companies say, hey, let's slap a mental health first aid training on it and call it a day. I think that that's a great effort. But the thing I will share is that I witnessed that in my own company, and I can't say that that actually had a tremendous benefit. The thing we have to remember is that a clinical narrative regarding symptoms and diagnosis is important for clinicians, and that tends to be the conversation when you have mental health first aid. But what really is necessary in the workplace is going to be different from what a clinician uses. It really instead in the workplace should focus on behaviors of someone struggling. And because of that reality, because I witnessed that and I saw what worked and what didn't work, I became familiar with an organization out of Canada who a colleague of mine had been working with, what they were doing. And if you know anything about the mental health environment, there are two countries leading the way in this conversation in the workplace, and that's Australia and Canada. They are taking more steps than we are in the US to bring mental health to the forefront. They have a set of standards in Canada that they have to adhere to when it comes to mental health. And so this organization follows that and fulfills on that. And because of that, they have created other programs that are driving real change around mental health that are not clinical focused. They have a peer-to-peer program that they offer. They have a manager training that is offered to really help managers connect with their employees in a safe way, but in a way that gets to perhaps the heart of a performance issue. So you don't lose an employee. Instead, you find a way to support them.
Let's talk a little bit more about some of the other programs, like maybe there's something outside just this one specific organization you're speaking about that could start to get people more involved, or maybe outside of just, like you said, that mental health first aid training.
So the things that I learned that I have on my website, I have a very high level 5 steps to creating a culture of compassion. So there's 5 things that I saw that worked really well, and that the combination of these 5 things absolutely will shift a culture. The first was, and we actually experienced this, was a clear vision and a commitment of inclusion for invisible disabilities from the highest levels of leadership in the organization that then are backed by organizational policies, right? That actually have policies in place that say, this is how we're going to operate. And this is our leadership telling our people leaders, this is the pathway forward. And that's our company position. And so you have to almost have that remit, that buy-in, and that directive from the senior levels within the organization, first and foremost. And then a robust and easily accessible mental health support. So this could be really taking a look at your EAP program and having mental health access be easy. I think I've heard horror stories of people trying to get in to see a therapist and the wait list being like 4 months. Like they need support now. So whatever barriers are in the way of your employee actually getting in front of a physician need to be navigated so that they can get that care immediately. When they are finally at the brink of getting support, the last thing they need is to hear, you can't see a physician for 4 months.
Oh, right. And not only that, but EAP programs aren't marketed very well in the company. So a lot of people are even unaware of what it means and what the benefit to them is. And they may know it's there, just kind of having gone through their insurance stuff, annually, but not really know what it's for or how to use it.
Exactly.
Encouraging people, like taking these types of things and saying, hey, did you know we had this?
Right.
Having that conversation all the time. Hey, everybody, did you know we have this?
Yeah, and there were forums that we held when I was at my company where we had like a panel discussion, for example, whether it was World Mental Health Day that's coming up on 10/10 or May Mental Health Awareness Month, where you would have like small panel discussions, invite a division to that panel discussion and have an EAP representative there saying, hey, let me give you the cliff notes of what you need to know. On the EAP website, it might be overwhelming, but if you need support, these are the critical things you need to walk out of here having in your pocket. Mm-hmm. So whatever opportunities there are to get in front of employees, so they're not having to be at their own, hunting around for something is going to only, get that access in their hands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. It's very important for the employer to let the employees know it's there and continually remind, because we have to be, I don't know, they say we have to be told 6 to 7 times before we really
get it.
Yeah, right. So,
yep.
And maybe that as employees, we're even sometimes oh yeah, that's so much work, right? Oh, it's so much trouble. I don't have time for that. If the whole culture is that, and what if the culture is that not only do we have that in place, but we encourage you to take time off work for your mental health.
Yeah, exactly. How many times are employees saying, I have a headache, I have a stomach ache, when really they're just overwhelmed. They're dealing with their own stuff and they don't want to admit that they're having a mental health day.
Yeah. We should just have mental health days. I've always said that, but I've taken them, obviously we've all taken them. They call it playing hooky, but it seems so silly because it's like, if my brain really needs a break, then more than likely my brain really needs a break. So that's
exactly.
That's just how it is. And, it's interesting how different companies set things up, right? Some companies have holidays and then vacation and then sick time, and some have PTO all inclusive and all of that. But if you I prefer a structure to it where you do have your sick time and you do have mental health days and you do have vacation days, because your brain, for me, I could be wrong, but for me, my brain uses those days for what they're meant for then. Rather than PTO, it's just everything. It's like, what does that even mean? But for me, I'm like, well, I know that I have this much. And if I know I have mental health days, not only is that a great benefit to me and can take some anxiety and stress away knowing they're there, but it's just such a great thing to give to an employee so that they have that empowerment of saying, today's just not a good day for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And they're not looked upon any less or any weaker. They're just human, right?
Yeah. And we don't realize how things manifest in our bodies because we're emotionally inept most of the time at being, at really understanding what's happening, what our feelings really are. So like you said, a bellyache, a headache, it could be physical reactions to something much greater.
Absolutely. Number 3 on my shifting workplace culture list is something that I have a personal connection to, and that's the education and training of people leaders. I think at the end of the day, if you have a remit at the highest level of the organization and you have a resource group of employees voluntarily driving change, those are critical. Mm-hmm. But fundamentally, if your people leaders, the ones that you entrust, represent the organization and be the face of the organization, if they are not aligned, if they are not trained, if they do not know how to demonstrate compassion and empathy, you've missed. So I think that's really important. So what does that look like? Years ago, I think it was coined as emotional intelligence. I think fundamentally now we have to go back to basics and just teach what it means to be empathetic, compassionate, and be in the listening of your employee if you see a change in performance.
Yes. And well, emotional intelligence is the buzzword, but the problem is I think the challenge is, I guess, would be that a lot of the people we're looking to have that understanding and empathy and compassion for employees also don't have that for themselves. I think sometimes I love how you say people leaders, they need some type of emotional intelligence training. They need some empathy and compassion training, because you're right, we're missing that in the workplace. But then we can't just expect people know it.
Right.
So we would have to, I feel like putting together some type of empathy, compassion training, and or at least having a class taught about what is emotional intelligence. So if as leaders we can tap into our own feelings, it would be far easier for us to tap into the emotions of someone else.
I totally agree with you there. Absolutely. And that definitely is, I think, a really important component if you're trying to shift a culture, is you really do need to make sure that your people leaders are equipped and capable of caring for the people, your greatest asset, and that's your employees. So then the next one I have, and I'm going to go back to the company that I mentioned in Canada because I love what they're doing. They actually have a structured peer-to-peer community that they build. It's a peer support community that they will come into your organization, and those employees who have lived mental health kind of like experience how they've navigated their own mental illness can so choose to volunteer to be part of this peer community as another mechanism to support an employee should they deal unexpectedly with a mental health challenge. They can actually tap into this peer community within their own organization, and in a very structured training way, this body of people are there for your employees to lean into, in addition to EAP, in addition to other resources. But what an amazing experience that would be for an employee to actually talk to their peer, and say, hey, so you're part of this community, you have depression. God, how do you do it? How do you do it? You know the pressures that we're under here in, company X. And when this happens, every time of the month or whatever that we have to deal with, like, how do you navigate it here at work? And just imagine the level of support and how that would make them feel to have that. It's just an amazing program that I can't say enough about.
Well, it sounds like you're very excited about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, it's just a good way to be basically with it.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. Mm-hmm. Well, okay. So number 4, did you share that with us?
Yeah, that was number 4. And so number 5, which is the last one, which I think is really a cool way. So I think the thing about mental health is we have to do a better job of making it cool and making it okay to talk about. So how do you do that? You find a vehicle or a way to tell stories, right? We all know storytelling is one of the most effective ways to reach people. And so whether it's like a recorded vignette that you have an employee tell their story, if they would like to, maybe it's a leader of an organization who's dealt with his own or her own challenges that she would feel courageous enough to tell that story. An interactive panel discussion, maybe it's a speaking platform where you have people come together. At the company I was at, we actually had a TED platform, and a lot of people chose to tell their mental health story. And when you do that, employees see themselves in that person, and it becomes okay and less of a thing. So I truly believe in my heart that, creating a culture of inclusion, compassion, has a lot to do with employees sharing their personal stories and opening the dialogue.
That's very true, in that you have to have that open in order for people to feel comfortable with it and make it cool. So, okay, what I was thinking about while you were saying this is the difference between a large organization and a small business.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were with a large organization that had a platform by which to create these types of platforms for you to have conversations about. Say I'm 100, 150, 200 employees or less.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, how can I do that? How do I do that?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a big platform. It could be as simple as, a few employees maybe do a pre-recorded vignette series, and that gets pushed out to employees to watch, maybe a short video or something that's going to grab their attention. It could be, an interactive panel discussion on World Mental Health Day in the cafeteria, a lunch and learn, anything that is going to afford, and it doesn't have to be initially, it doesn't have to be employees telling their stories, right? In a smaller organization where you feel like family, maybe you're not quite there, or maybe you're on the other side of the spectrum and you do feel comfortable. But regardless, it's just about humanizing mental health experiences so people can relate to it. And it actually, diffuses the stigma. by having that. So whatever platform works for a smaller company, it could be, an annual meeting where there's a short video and it may be an open panel discussion, something, or breakout sessions, anything.
Well, statistically, given the statistics you said, we're all being affected. So even if we aren't the person with mental illness, we are being affected by someone with it. So if you are a leader in your company and you have a story to tell, you could step right into telling that story.
Yes.
You could be the one to share yours first and create a transparency around this conversation. Okay, so now I'm the employee and this leader has shared something with me that is very intimate and very valuable, very valuable. And if they can do that, then I probably can too.
And they also give you permission to talk about them.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
that's the really cool thing about a leader, right? If you're not comfortable talking about your own story and you have a leader that courageously just disclosed to you that they have dealt with depression themselves, you now have permission to talk to another peer about your leader's depression. And imagine what can unfold there.
Wow. Yeah, I hadn't even thought about it like that, Michelle, but you're right. Understanding can certainly unfold from there.
Yeah.
Lots of it. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
So, I mean, and the other piece of data I do want to share is that research shows that for every dollar that is spent investing in mental health in the workplace, it has a $3 to $5 return on investment. Mm-hmm. So for those thinking, how do I get this justified that we're going to look at mental health? Stop for a second and recognize that if you put in the dollars, if you put in the energy, if you put in the programs, you're going to see a return on that because your employees are going to stay working. They're going to stay engaged. You're not going to probably deal with as much turnover because unfortunately, if you have poor performance, the employee gets, ushered out of the company and then you got to deal with turnover. So, I mean, there's so many reasons why we should be looking at creating proactive programs and awareness around mental health to keep good people in their seats.
I like that. Keep good people in their seats. And this is the conversation that needs to be had in the organization. So I'm glad that you are out sharing this with all of us because it is really important. And again, like I said, statistically, we're all being, in some way, we're affected. Yeah. And if you are the fourth one in five that aren't being affected, it may be that soon you could be affected.
Right. Life events.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah.
Life events happen. Yeah. And we don't see those coming. Right. So here I was a little girl growing up with a bipolar mom. I'm adopted. I'm immune. Right. Oh, she had bipolar. I didn't. It's not in my gene pool. Well, last year, and I shared this with you on the last podcast, last year, for the first time, I was dealing with my own depression from left field. And it was due to a life event that I wasn't sure was going to happen. But then when it happened, I was like, holy smokes, this is really taking me down for the count. So life events can show up, people, even if you don't have it in your family, and that could really take you down.
It's very true. Things are so triggering. And trauma, we all have a lot of trauma. And we don't understand how triggering some of that can be. And we could deal with things in a great way for years and years and years and have something come up, like you said, all of a sudden and, unexpectedly. So if we just have the compassion with everyone, understanding that today we may be okay and tomorrow we may not.
Right. Yeah. It's so true.
Yeah.
So true.
So, okay, another great conversation with you as usual, Michelle. So I'm going to ask you the question I always ask at the end of our podcast episodes, which is, in closing, is there anything that you think needed to be said that we didn't say today?
I think we shared a lot. My goal was to share as much information as I have. I mean, I think the one thing I just want to invite people, even if they're not in the HR capacity, to be the change in their own organization. And you don't have to have been affected by mental health. You can maybe step in the shoes of someone who has and be that champion for change and be the one that who's not, ashamed to shake the tree and say, hey, can we pay attention to this here? this is important. So if you're interested in, being that change agent and you want information and you want data to support you as you go in and initiate those conversations, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I am so happy to support you because that's what I'm up to. I want companies to really start to shift, and I want to be at the source of that.
Great. I'm glad that you're getting the word out here. And thank you for coming on to the show again and sharing with us. This is really important information. So
You're
I
welcome.
cannot thank you enough for coming back again.
You're welcome. Thank you for this podcast that you do, Kimberly, because I think more and more people are, tuning into conversations like this in general that you're having. So thank you for your podcast.
Yes. Well, oh, thank you. You're welcome. All right. So this is the close of the Happy Healthy Workplace podcast. Be sure to connect with Michelle, find all of her information, all the links to everything that we talked about today in the show notes. And if you love what we talk about, be sure to rate and review us because we want to have feedback and bring you all the best stuff and all the best guests. So this is the close. Have a happy, healthy day. that's a wrap for today. The Happy Healthy Workplace podcast is now complete. Be sure to subscribe and join us weekly for secrets, solutions, or strategies that help you create a profitable business where people really want to work. This is Kimberly Ficklin, wishing you a happy, healthy day.